that's the reason why we started, instead of chapter 1, going into the introduction of the law and legal reasoning, again, really kind of theoretical conversations, we went directly into the meat, the foundation of business law, that being what again? Contracts. And so hopefully by now,
it was 8:10 by the way.
Thank you. Hopefully by now, you all are masters of at least what? Contract law, right? So now we're going to step back. After we, I think, built that foundation, we are going to go into a conversation about the pillars of law itself, right? And I think we talked about some of the early history of law, right? How law in this country was built on the common law principles, right? And the common law derived from what did we talk about on the first day?
Caste system.
Well, the caste system is the overall kind of makeup, a method in which this country is operated, right? A caste system that divides the workers, right? Based upon what? Huh? I said the caste system divides workers based upon what? Come on.
Class.
What?
No, I mean.
What is it? We have been talking about this for 11 weeks. The caste system is a mechanism set up by who? The rich. To divide the workers in order for them to do what? They stay rich by doing what to the workers? Exploiting them, right? And preventing them from being able to have a fair bargaining agreement, right? And the way they trick them and keep them from extracting a fair value for their work is by doing what? In this caste system, how's the caste system divided up by?
Class.
How's the system divided up by? The caste system? You don't know? Come on. 11 weeks. Mr. Calloway, save us. Mr. Calloway. How is the caste system, how are the workers divided in the caste system? By what?
Oh, by race.
By race! Come on, people, 11 weeks. We've talked about this how many times in this course, huh? Right?
The original
And why, Mr. Calloway, why is it then, since Mr. Tucker helps you out, why is it that they divide the workers up by race? So they can turn the workers what? Against each other, as opposed to doing what?
Helping each other.
Exactly. As opposed to working together, demanding a equitable share of the wealth that they're creating, they're turned against one another. Right? That is the caste system. So now we're going to talk about the legal system that we have that in some way props up the current caste system. Right? It doesn't necessarily have to be that way, however. It serves that right now, but we're going to explain exactly how that legal system works so we, in this class, can become masters of the legal system and hopefully help to reform it so it can prop up a system of equity and justice as opposed to a system of division, right? So that's what the conversation is all about today. And you go turn to the chapter 1, we'll be able to follow along in the conversation. All right? So we first of all said that so again, understanding about what was said before, that,
It's 8:15.
thank you, the U.S. system of law is built on, where does it find its roots?
Philosophy.
Mr. Hassan, where do you find the roots,
Isn't it Old English law or
Mr. Hassan?
Old English law?
Exactly. And what was the old English law? What were they called?
So what would they call it?
What were they called? What was the old English law called? The old English law. And were they not called canons? Right? The canons of law. And they were based upon what kind of courts again?
The English word?
An English court were called what? Court of what? Huh? It's called, what was the body of law, of general rules that applied throughout the entire English realm? What was it called? Common law, right? Going back to this caste system. Common law were rules for who? Common people, right? And who were the commoners in the context of England? The poor. It was there a distinction between the commoners based upon race? No. It's based upon wealth. So this whole idea that, again, that race has been a division, for the beginning of time is not true, right? Because, again, in Europe, particularly as embodied by England, we see that the workers were divided not by race, right? But people were divided by money. And so they had they had laws that were set up for the commoners, right? To deal with relationships between the wealthy and the commoners. Not necessarily, again, these laws were not necessarily set up that deal with issues and conflicts between the wealthy themselves. However, ultimately, some of these, again, rules began to apply to the wealthy as they were, again, applied to who? The commoners, right? Thus the name common law, right? So that's how, again, they were, have a seat. You created courts of law and remedies at law that were based upon the kind of statutes or the embodiment of what that law is. And then you had, again, courts of equity that were based upon kind of common sense principles of justice and fair dealing, right? And so these were ultimately, so again, the differences between the courts of law, right, and the courts of equity were what? Miss Green, what were the differences between the courts of equity and the courts of law? I'm in chapter 1. Help her out, Miss Hall.
The courts of law, the legal means to enforce the right and redress the wrong, and the courts of equity was a branch of law founded on notions of justice and fair dealing that seeks to supply remedy when no adequate remedy of law is available.
Okay, and who who was the decision maker in the courts of law? I'm sorry, you said that in the courts of law, who were the decision makers?
The King's Court, the English King's Court,
The court of law.
The king's courts were, the decision makers in the king's courts were usually called what?
The court of law.
Judges. Judges. But in the context of the courts of equity, who were the decision makers in the context of courts of equity?
The advisor to the king.
Called what? A chancellor, right? And so even today in courts of equity, which generally deals with what, Ms. Green?
You said even today, courts of equity, the branch of law.
Today, what do courts of equity deal with today?
justice and fair dealing.
Of course, they try to basically ensure justice and fair dealing, right? But what do they oftentimes deal with? Courts of equity in today's court system. Today's court system, the courts of equity, often deals with, again, land disputes, right? Because in courts of law, again, they can only award what type of damages generally in today's courts of law, based upon concepts of contracts. What are the remedies, Miss Hodge? What are the remedies? If a seller breaches his contract, what can most courts of law only grant? No, I'm not equitable remedies. I'm asking what generally in courts of law, what are the, pardon me?
Performance, injunctions.
That's in context of, I'm saying courts of law, not courts of equity. Courts of law.
That is remedy and equity. Where are you?
I'm in chapter, hold on. I don't want to hear that again, right? The reason I'm saying that, people, is because I am dealing with the chapter that you, right, are responsible for reading. I can't tell, I'm not here to walk you and read to you. I don't have enough time to read for you page by page, right? You have to have read the book yourself. And I'm not coming up with information that's not in the book. This is all in the book. And it's in the beginning of the book right here, the beginning of the chapter. So I'm just asking you guys to kind of follow along with us. We talked about we're starting chapter 1. So I'm asking you, for this last time, I'm going to answer that question. We are on page 7 in the book, all right?
But he's talking about court.
I'm asking you, so again, what are the remedies that are provided by courts of law?
An injunction and repression.
You talk about
Okay,
land.
I'm talking about specifically here
and money.
in paragraph 2 on page 7, right? Read that for me, Miss Hall. Miss Hall, read it.
As a general rule, today's courts, like the early English courts, will not grant equitable remedies unless the remedy at all monetary damages.
So generally, what, Miss Green, are the remedies of law?
Are you talking about monetary damages?
Exactly. That's what the book is talking about. And again, if we do a little bit of reading before we come to class, we all follow along, right? And so Miss Hodge, so tell me, what are the remedies of, what are generally going to come out, what are the remedies of equitable courts? Unlike the court of law, equitable courts are going to provide what? Ms. Green?
Are you talking about performance injunction?
Exactly. Specific performance. That's the difference. So those are the key concepts for you guys to think of. All right. Have a seat. So in the context of the parties in courts, what are the parties named in courts? Who's taking my time? You remember my time?
8:25.
Come on, man.
I was trying to help.
No, I know, but keep my time.
All right, guys.
All right,
8:25.
because at 8:45 we have our at 8:40 we have our speaker. All right. So in the context of the Miss King, tell me what are the parties to a legal action? What are the names of the parties? The plaintiff, and what is the plaintiff?
The suing party.
The suing party, absolutely. Next is who?
The defendant.
And the defendant is what?
The party being sued.
And what's the other key component, or the key person in the context of a legal action?
Petitioner.
Now, a petitioner is what?
The party bringing a lawsuit.
So the party bringing the lawsuit, you said, was called who?
The plaintiff.
The plaintiff, right? So the plaintiff and the petitioner is a synonym in many cases, right? However, one key difference is that, again, as we're going to talk about the structure of the courts, you have lower courts and you have higher courts. The lower courts, right, are generally what they call trial courts. That's the court that is going to hear arguments based upon the facts and hear testimony, again, and make decisions, particularly in the context of the federal rules or the rules of evidence, state rules of evidence or federal rules of evidence. And federal and state rules of evidence are generally crafted based upon the federal rules of evidence. However, the higher courts, which are going to be considered appellate courts, they're not going to hear, again, testimony in that context. All they're going to be hearing are legal arguments based upon the testimony that has already been provided and discussed in the lower court. And so, generally, the distinction based upon the names that you have mentioned, again, petitioner and respondent, petitioner and respondent are going to generally be referred to in terms relating to the appellate level proceeding, right? So you have your plaintiff, right? You have your plaintiff, and you have your defendant in the trial court, and then you have your petitioner and your respondent in the appellate court. So what's going to be the difference, Ms. King, between whether or not you are a respondent or you are a petitioner?
Whether or not you're the one suing.
Pardon me?
Whether or not you're the one suing.
So you have a plaintiff versus defendant, right? That's in the trial court. So we go to the appellate court. Who's going to be of these parties? Who's going to be the petitioner? Help her out, Miss Murray.
You said who's going to be the petitioner?
Who's going to be the petitioner?
The party bringing the lawsuit.
It's 8:30.
Thank you. Bringing the lawsuit. The lawsuit is here on the trial court level. Right? I'm asking you, who is going to be the petitioner in the appellate court? Which one? There's only one or other. Come on.
The plaintiff?
Ah. So you would think it's a plaintiff, right? But an appeal is what? Ms. King? Why? So again, on the trial court level, these people come together, the judge or the jury. Again, the decision maker in the context of trial courts can be either judge or jury, first of all. That's a key thing to understand. But then the ruling or the order that comes out, right, is the decision. And what happens, Ms. Murray, if one person doesn't agree with that decision?
They can appeal it.
They can appeal it, right? So then they go to the appeal level. Again, this market not working. The appeal. And in the context of the appeal, that's when you have the petitioner and respondent. Who then is the petitioner, Ms. King?
The defendant.
So let's just say, for hypothetically speaking, you and Ms. Murray have a dispute, right? You guys have an agreement. Ms. Murray claims that you breached her agreement. She takes you to court, and the court rules in favor of Ms. Murray. You then, so again, Ms. Murray is the plaintiff, right? And what are you? Right. Ms. King is the defendant. So now, you're not satisfied with that, right? So you do what? You appeal, right? And so now, who is the petitioner? You're the petitioner, that's right. Although you were the defendant here, right? You now become what? The petitioner. And who's the respondent? Ms. Murray?
Me.
Even though you were the plaintiff, you're the respondent. So again, my point of going through the exercise is to let you know that this terminology here, the plaintiff and defendant, don't necessarily, again, determine who is the petitioner and respondent. The petitioner respondent is determined based upon who brings the appeal, right? Have a seat. All right, now let's go to the good, I think, breakdowns on exhibits 1 and exhibits 1.4 and 1.5. Let's go through these things. So this talks about how to read and understand court decisions. And again, one of the things that we're going to deal with in the next presentation is briefing a case. Each group will have to brief a case and have to understand what we've just kind of gone over in terms of this appellate and trial court breakdown. But in the context of Exhibit 1.4, we have, first of all, the federal courts and the state courts. Now, what are the differences between federal courts and state courts, Mr. Muslim?
State court opinions appear in regional unions of the national court system.
I'm sorry, the major differences between state courts and federal courts. What are the laws? Okay, let's step back. First of all, so the
835.
thank you. In the context of the sources of laws, you generally have three sources, right? First of all, you have, or let's step back. Actually, you have three sources of how law is created, even though only in here we have a breakdown of two. One is the Constitution, right, Mr. Muslim? So you have the Constitution, and then you have statutes, right? In the context of the Constitution, then so you're talking about what? When you talk about Constitution, what are you talking about, Mr. Muslim?
All laws in the United States.
All laws embodied in the U.S. Constitution. Huh? Mr. Oshima, wait. Are all laws embodied by the U.S. Constitution? No, right? What are the rights embodied in the U.S. Constitution?
The U.S. Constitution is the supreme law of the land. State constitutions are supreme within state borders to extent.
Exactly. So that's the whole point. The U.S. Constitution, right, are the fundamental laws that protect our rights, right? What's the most popular law in the Constitution that we are familiar with? There are many, but what are the most popular ones that you know of, Mr. Oshima Boyd? The 13th Amendment? What's the 13th Amendment? What is the 13th Amendment, Mr. Muslim?
Wait, how do you say the speech one? Freedom of speech.
Right.
What?
Sleepless nights.
Okay. So today's homework, in addition to the definitions that are on the page, and actually from now on we're going to start doing before class. We start doing definitions. So you got the definitions for this chapter and the definitions for chapter 2. But we'll just do for the weekend. I'm going to give you the definitions for this class, and I'm also going to require you to write out what the U.S. Constitution, the elements of the U.S. Constitution, what are the provisions of each provision in the United States Constitution and the amendments, all right, that Constitution. You will definitely know, and as an extra credit, I'm going to have you check out the movie called 13, all right, which is a conversation about what the 13th Amendment is. So hopefully, when I ask that question next week, you will have that down pat. But go straight into, you have the constitutional law, as you said, and you have state constitutions, and you have federal constitutions. The key point that was being discussed is the distinction between state and federal. So you have statutes, right, which are ordinances, also things that come out of the uniform laws and the uniform commercial code. In most cases, in the state context, these are codified, as they are even in the federal context. So the uniform laws, both the uniform commercial code and other uniform laws, are codified in statutes, right? And again, when we talk about state courts versus federal courts, Mr. Muslim, state courts are going to decide what laws based upon what? Mr. Parks, courts and state courts are going to decide laws based upon what?
State law.
State law, right? And Mr. Muslim, federal courts are going to decide laws based upon what? Federal law, right? Those are the key things that you need to know, right? There are going to be some exceptions, which again, state law can be again, or federal courts can hear state legal issues if, for example, there is a difference between the parties. So party A, let's say going back to this example, Mr. King was living in Maryland, and Miss Murray was living in the District of Columbia, and they had a legal dispute. Question might rise, well, who's going to decide it? Miss King lives in Maryland, but Miss Murray lives in D.C., right? What court is going to decide that? And so again, that's one context in which federal courts will come in to decide a state issue to some extent. So we're gonna actually continue this conversation and on Monday. But for today's homework, you will have to have, again, the definitions done. And second of all, you will have a requirement to explain all the provisions of the United States Constitution, as well as, and I'm not talking about giving treaties, but just summarize, again, the key elements of each title in the U.S. Constitution, and then the amendments, all right?
So, you said it's due today?
No, I'm saying for today's homework, meaning
okay.
over the weekend,
Okay.
for Monday, all right?
Like 50 definitions.
Yes, put it up on a blackboard, right? And then for extra credit, we're going to give you an opportunity to get some extra credit points in as well by doing the 13, which is a great movie. Without any further ado, who would like to introduce the speaker based upon the bio that has been sent out? I can introduce you, right? But who wants to get credit for today? Because I see a couple people who did not get called upon. Mr. Thomas, you ready? How about you, Miss Samay? Were you called upon?
I wasn't.
Okay.
You
Ready? All right. Let's go and have Miss Samay introduce the speaker. Come on up, Miss Samay.
Our guest lecturer for today is Raheema Abdulaleem, and she works. And she works with a federal agency.
You want to read her bio?
In this role, Ms. Abdulaleem provides expert legal advice to the Executive Office of the President on compliance with equal employment opportunity law, physical and appropriation law, personal security, and litigation. Previously, Ms. Abdulaleem worked as a senior trial attorney in the United States Department of Justice Civil Rights Division, Employment Litigation Section. While at DOJ, Ms. Abdulaleem represented the federal government in prosecuting entities for violating civil rights laws. Ms. Abdulaleem served as co-chair of the Civil Rights Division post 9/11 Backlash Subcommittee and served 2 terms as vice chair of the Department of Justice Associated of Black Attorneys. Before entering government service, Ms. Abdulaleem worked as King and Spalding LLP in Atlanta, Georgia, and Fowler's Bar in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Ms. Abdulaleem earned her Juris Doctorate from Harvard Law School and received a Bachelor of Arts degree from Yale University. While at Harvard Law School, Ms. Abdulaleem was a student attorney at the Harvard Legal Aid Bureau, and she served as an editor on the Harvard Civil Rights Liberties Law Review. In addition to being an experienced litigator, Ms. Abdulaleem is also a role model and spokesperson for tolerance, diversity, and commitment to her community. As one of the most senior African-American Muslims women attorneys working in the federal government, Ms. Abdulaleem was selected to serve on a panel discussion at the White House for the Muslim Women Emerging Leaders. Ms. Abdulaleem is routinely asked to speak to new lawyers and law students about her experiences in the public and private sector, the challenges she faced as a racial and religious minority, and the tools she has used to overcome those challenges. Ms. Abdulaleem is also committed to ensuring that high school students are provided with assistance in the college application process. In furtherance of that goal, Ms. Abdulaleem volunteers at an annual program called Why Apply that provides day-long workshops for local high school students and their parents on the college application and interview process. Ms. Abdulaleem lives with her husband, Talib I, also a lawyer, and 2 children in Hyattsville, Maryland, a Washington, D.C. suburb.
Thank you. I'm so sorry that I was hoping that would be shorter. Pleasure meeting all of you. So I just want to ask a quick question, just so I understand who's in the room. Who's a senior? A couple seniors and juniors? So almost everybody else is a junior. So no, this is like an upperclassman seminar. Okay, excellent. Of the people in the class, who's planning to go to grad school? Okay. And who's planning to go to law school? So no lawyers. So my job here is to convince you to go to law school. So people who are going to grad school, what fields are you all considering studying?
International relations.
International relations. You said what? Accounting. Marketing. There was a couple other grad school hands that went up. Undecided? Okay. So everybody else is going to go out and make big money when you graduate? Yeah. All right. So let me tell you a little bit about myself. You heard my bio. So I currently work in federal government, and I do what's more similar to being in-house counsel, which means I assist the federal government, but it's kind of like an in-house thing. So like hiring and firing, or things like appropriations or fiscal law. But prior to that, I was at the Department of Justice, where I did civil rights litigation. Before that, I was at a law firm where I did employment discrimination, but representing the management side of things. So I've been practicing law for about, I guess, like over 25 years, something like that. That sounds long. Yeah, I guess that's right. I don't know.
I don't know. More like 15 years.
15?
Yeah.
Oh, okay, 15 years. I was like, wait a minute, 25 sounds way too long. And during that time, I've been in basically what's called the private sector. So when I was at law firms, I was in the private sector. So that means my clients were corporations. And my job as an attorney defending the corporations was to provide them with, legal advice about any lawsuits that they were subjected to. Now, in the private sector, you could be in both federal court and state court, because it just matters where the plaintiff has decided to file suit. Because I largely focused on employment litigation and discrimination, that was largely brought under Title VII, which is a federal statute, which means that for the most part, the cases were filed in federal district court. So I understand earlier today, I saw that you all were talking about the distinction between federal court and state courts and where lawsuits would be filed. So generally, cases that are brought under Title VII would be brought in your federal district courts. Now that I work for the federal government, almost 100% of my cases are going to be dealing with federal district court cases, because the laws that we are sworn to uphold are federal laws. That's generally the kind of courts that I'm in. Now, I spent from 2009 through 2015, I was in the Civil Rights Division of the Department of Justice. And during that time, my caseload really focused on federal anti-discrimination provisions. Has anybody ever heard of what that is? It's basically federal laws that protect your civil rights. And so they can deal with a whole lot of different areas. They can deal with employment. They can deal with education, housing. There's so many different laws that are supposed to protect what are called our civil rights. And so the ones that I focused on were employment rights. And there's a federal statute called Title VII of the Civil Rights Act. And the purpose of this statute was to make sure that people weren't discriminated against based on their race, their religion, their national origin, things like that. Those are the types of protected categories that the law seeks to make sure that no one is discriminated against. And so it wants to make sure that in terms of your hiring or firing or promotions, that those types of categories aren't factored into those decisions. And so if you go to work and they say, like, look, I'm going to fire you because of your skin color, or because of your race, your national origin, that's prohibited. And so if that kind of thing happens, then an employee can go, and there's an administrative process generally you have to go through first. So many people have heard of the EEOC, the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. You can file a complaint with them, and then once your complaint works its way through the process, once a certain time frame has expired, you can then go to federal court. But that's one of many laws that seek to kind of provide equality to people, to ensure that people aren't being discriminated against based on these types of characteristics. And so that's largely what I've done throughout my career. I've been on various sides during my career, at one point representing companies who have been defendants in those types of actions. But I've also represented the United States government, affirmatively bringing lawsuits on behalf of individuals who have been discriminated against. So that's kind of in a nutshell what I do. Does anybody have any questions about the law in general, or law school or grad school, or the types of cases that I've brought?
Do you ever have to do with money laundering?
Money laundering, no. I'm trying to think of who generally does money laundering cases. Probably a criminal. It's more of a criminal statute that prohibits money laundering. So somebody who does more criminal. Sometimes you may hear of like white collar crime, or that's the kind of person who would handle those types of cases.
And which division in the United States Justice Department handle those types of cases?
So probably the criminal division, I think. Yeah.
Excuse me, is there any organizations that are well known that you have to go against or defend?
Yeah, I mean, so in the Justice Department, I encourage anyone who's interested in pursuing a career in law, or finding out more about the types of cases that the Justice Department brings, or any federal agency. Most federal agencies actually have a website that you could go to, and they actually list their complaints. They list the consent decrees, which are basically like settlement agreements that the parties enter once to conclude a case. And for most federal agencies, and I can definitely speak on DOJ's, what DOJ does, they post all of that online. So you could literally go to your computer now and go to usdoj.gov, and it'll have all the different divisions within the Justice Department. And you could actually see what types of cases are they bringing, and how are these cases being resolved, and how much money are these cases being resolved for. So for example, one of the cases that I worked on when I was at DOJ was a case that was brought against the Fire Department of New York. And that case involved an allegation that Black and Hispanic firefighters were actually being, had to take a test that had what's called a disparate impact on Black and Hispanic firefighters. So basically saying that the test they had to take to become firefighters was unfair and kind of weeded out Blacks and Hispanics, and it didn't really have a relation to the job. In a nutshell, that's what a disparate impact case is trying to accomplish. And so we were able to actually resolve that case by settlement agreement for $94 million. And what that kind of money goes towards is actually divided up by people who had applied for the job, didn't get it, or people who were delayed, and instead of getting the job in 2000, for example, say you didn't get the job until 2005. And so it's looking at, for those 5 years, if that person had to have another job but that made less money, let's try to give them some money that makes up the difference. So it sounds like a lot of money, but when you divide it by, it's like thousands of plaintiffs who were impacted. Some people got a substantial amount of money, but more, it's divided over a large group of people. So that's one of the last cases I handled before I left.
I got a question. As you worked in the private and public sector, which one do you prefer as your career?
You know, I think that each sector you learn and you gain valuable skills. I think starting off in the private sector was a great opening because the private sector, the firms generally have a lot of resources that they can devote to training and to helping you kind of get your feet wet. So I think I value those experiences for sure. I think personally, you know, working for the Justice Department when I was working there, it was just a life-changing opportunity. It's a really an opportunity to serve and advance the causes of equity and justice, which I think a lot of people are the reasons they go to law school. They want to make sure that people who don't have a voice and don't have an opportunity to have their voice heard have their interest upheld. And so being able to serve in the Justice Department during that time, I think was, you know, an experience that I'll probably treasure the rest of my life.
I got one more question.
Let's actually, because I know some people are getting ready to need to leave because they have classes. So let's give, first of all, Ms. Abdulaleem a round of applause. And then anybody who has any questions can come in and ask.
And I applaud you all for having an 8 o'clock class 3 days a week. That is not easy.
And getting here largely on time. In fact, most of my students, they get on time.